A report by KPMG shows that Nigeria could be on course for an improved performance this year as a pickup in economic activity suggests that the effect of the energy and foreign exchange reforms may be waning. That's according to KPMG. Oluwole Adelokun, the partner and economist at KPMG West Africa, joins me now as we unpack their outlook for Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time today, Wole, and let's get to your outlook and what's underpinning this, your expectation for growth to be stronger later this year.
Okay, thanks, Akin. So from our own perspective, as at the time we did the report, we look at some of the global dynamics impacting the Nigerian environment. So those issues include supply chain, which has actually reduced. There are issues around inflation globally, which is also stemming down. Now, as we go into the second half of the year, our view is that inflation will begin to actually reduce slightly. And what is driving that are three things. Number one, the CBN policy around inflation targeting, which they've consistently increased the MPR, would actually support that. We've also seen instances where government is also coming up with suspension of some of the import duty around staple foods. We'll also expect that will also actually, impact inflation as we go into the future. The other thing also is that because inflation rate globally is also actually reducing, being that Nigeria is an import-dependent economy, would also expect that will also actually drop. So our view is that as we go into the second and the third, quarter of the year, we should begin to see a downward slope. Our view is that it should actually get to about 23% compared to average of 25% in 2023.
We'll get to what's underpinning that outlook for inflation, but before we get there, let me look at the impact that we're seeing on the government reforms now. So we've had quite this year has been one of reforms. In fact, since the new administration came in there, we saw those reforms play out real quick. And I'd like to get your thoughts on this. And you say some of these headwinds are waning, and speak to this, and also what's your driving what's your thought process on the reform environment in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you. Now, as you look at the Nigerian environment, some of the reform that government has taken that has actually panned out well and has provided confidence in the economy is the things around the unification of the foreign exchange. While we'll understand that it has actually, led to some depreciation of Naira, but we've seen stability, and our view is that we expect that to continue in terms of the stability. If you look at the data, you will notice that the foreign portfolio investment into the country has actually, increased by about $2 billion. That's what we had as of June. If you also take a further look into our external reserves, as at 18th of this month, we have $37 billion compared to 34 as at the end of June. And other things, even in terms of remittance from diaspora, it has also actually increased. The global supply chain that I mentioned earlier has also actually reduced, and also government is also taking some steps with regards to increasing agricultural productivity, which we believe also will have impact in terms of food prices. So these are some of the variables that we'll consider. And when you look at the Purchasing Manufacturing Index, which was just released as at May, it was actually above 50%, which is about 52 compared to 48%. As at
so November. You're saying the manufacturers are getting back on board here?
Yeah.
All right, but let's come back to inflation, because that is a very sticky subject. It has quite a wider ramifications. You just said that you're seeing this to be about 23% at the end of the year.
23%.
23%. Expected to, that steam is expected to go down the second half of this year. But then looking at that and your risk to your outlook, you also mentioned that inflation, you talk of that exchange rate pass-through as well, and how that is also helping to compound things and making it better. Help me appreciate your thinking around inflation, because some will argue that 23% inflation this year is not achievable.
Okay, thank you. The reason why I have the view that as you go into the second part of the year, and as you go further into third quarter, fourth quarter, is that we'll expect a slight reduction, and average for the year maybe will be about 23%.
You mentioned the base effect. I agree with that.
So the base effect is one. Okay. But beyond the base effect, the CBN policy of inflation targeting is one factor. And let me say this, that even businesses require a stable environment from a pricing point of view for them to plan effectively. So that posture, and also the CBN has also said that the era where we have a situation where we're printing money, and we're having various intervention funds that is not targeted, that era is gone. So volume of money in circulation also would actually reduce. The expectation also is that from the fiscal point of view, the response that we're seeing in terms of fighting, providing staple food, providing, and suspension of some of the import duty would also help to moderate inflation as we go into the year. Our view is that we'll expect that moderation to take place. One major factor that needs to be attacked aggressively is food inflation.
Because I was going to get to that now and to say, okay, yes, if all of this is going to play out, then what are you calling for food inflation later there? Because we understand that the implications for food inflation are a bit more multifaceted, and how do you see that playing out as well?
Okay, so the major, issue that needs to be addressed is that food inflation, which currently stands about 42%. What that means is that government needs to look at increasing our production in terms of agricultural output, understand what are the issues across the value chain, from production to input material, to packaging and processing, to the point of logistics and transportation, and then the market. So that various, that value chain needs to be dimensioned and dismantle all the barriers. If we can do that, we'll expect that even food inflation will also crash.
Because I talked to these points because these are the things that affect the basic households in Nigeria. We're dealing with this cost of living challenge. We're seeing household consumption and spending power being eroded seriously. But then in terms of that view, your outlook, then what's your take on what we're expecting in terms of household consumption and also the spending power of the Nigerian?
Okay, yeah, thank you. In the recent time, because of the high inflation, the purchasing power has actually dropped significantly, and one of the key variables that determine economic growth is your consumption. So you have consumption, investment, government expenditure, and the difference between your exports and imports. So when purchasing powers drop, then consumption actually also drop. But our view is that because of certain intervention being put in place to crash food prices, also to some extent enhance the earning capacity, the government is also planning to bring in consumer credit scheme, which has been launched. Now that scheme, if it's effectively implemented, because in other markets, what you're saying is that credit actually is what enables people to actually consume. So you can actually plan and you can take either mortgages, you can actually go into consumable goods. Now, as government provider intervention through that consumer credit, our view is that it will enhance the capacity of people to actually consume, and it's being targeted at the working class, both the civil servant as well as people in the private sector. That would also help. The other plan is also to support the real sector, which is, using the BOI, DBN, to actually help businesses to have access to credit and enable them to produce in a way that it can help. And if we clear the issues around the transportation, like I said earlier, in terms of logistics, it will also help. So those are some of the things that I believe will enable, capacity of people to consume more with the consumer credit being brought into scheme.
All right, then. Thank you so much for your time. I'd love to go into other areas of this conversation, but we fast run out of time. But thank you so much for your time today. I'll be speaking with Oluwole Adelokun, who is the partner and economist at KPMG West Africa.